The Calvin and Hobbes strip from March 18th, 1992 finds Calvin asking his mom for some money to buy a heavy metal album. "Mom, can I have some money to buy a Satan-worshipping, suicide-advocating heavy metal album?" Oh, it's extra funny here his mother's simultaneous facial expression in response, as if Calvin's question was simply just another matter of course. "Calvin, the fact that these bands haven't killed themselves in ritual self-sacrifice shows that they're just in it for the money like everyone else. It's all for effect. If you want to shock and provoke, be sincere about it. Mainstream commercial nihilism can't be trusted? Afraid not, kiddo. Childhood is so disillusioning." If it's not clear to me what the state of mass society critique was in the early 90s, or specifically to what Bill Watterson was reacting against here, possibly the Tipper Gore metal trials, or the first wave of satanic black metal that was slowly starting to seep into mainstream consciousness. Who knows? It's worth pointing out that Per Olin, otherwise known as Dead, from the black metal band Mayhem, killed himself nearly a year earlier, but it's a massive stretch to think that that event got any play in the media whatsoever. In any case, Watterson deserves some credit here for his broader prescience on the suspect relationship between Western consumer culture and social identity. Because while Calvin is learning a valuable lesson as a kid on the comics page, many fully functional adults have yet to learn that same lesson 30 years after the strip first ran. Here, Watterson is critiquing a certain style of music and the normative presentation of the associated social scene, which, to the nuanced eye, might seem unsophisticated or naive, but really the specifics don't matter. It's largely irrelevant if satanic or nihilistic themes are more appropriately associated with black metal than heavy metal. What he's lampooning is a more abstract phenomenon that could be applied to any alternative subculture that poses itself as a meaningful counterpunch to the prevailing ideology of the day. Doom metal, black metal, punk, skateboarding, hip-hop, emo, whatever. It's all the same mentality and method of identity differentiation. I argue this because of my own past. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I was involved in the straight-edge hardcore scene. Went to the shows, played in a band, lived the straight-edge ideals. I felt keenly that my peers and I were unique among our generational cohort, that we had found the one thing that would truly set us apart from the world. And while abstaining from drugs and alcohol certainly has its positive and admirable aspects, to this day, for example, I remain horrified just how bad alcohol is for the human body, our approach had two fatal flaws. One, our identity and its methods were all predicated on a lack of something, an absence of a certain behavior, not a positive, constructive force. And two, our identity project was fashioned entirely within a consumer culture context that masqueraded as authentic when really it was not. Let's unpack that for a minute. Regarding the first point, it's a position of mental and emotional weakness to base your identity on what you're not. That applies to straight edge as much as it does to metaphysical positions like atheism or nihilism, or even, more obliquely, to social poses like Zoomer-Doomerism. Circling the wagons around what you're not can be needlessly divisive and is often alienating. And because your primary focus is on that largely imaginary other, what you actually are becomes less and less clear. You lose sight of that mythical, identical center that is so critical for your ego to function. Moreover, you also run the risk of enabling avoidant behavior, which always undermines your quality of life. When it comes to the second point, basing your identity in a consumer culture, we return to Calvin's dilemma in the strip. What does it mean to your identity when it is constructed around a commodified experience? For me, what finally shattered the illusion of straight edge and hardcore punk in general was the 2004 book called The Rebel Cell by Joseph Heath and Andrew Potter, retitled Nation of Rebels for the American audience, which was a left liberal takedown of the idea of counterculture prevalent in so many alternative social scenes. The book opens with both barrels blasting away. September 2003 marked a turning point in the development of Western civilization. It was the month that Adbusters magazine started accepting orders for the Black Spot sneaker, its own signature brand of subversive running shoes. After that day, no rational person could possibly believe that there was any tension between mainstream and alternative culture. What follows is an entertaining, interesting, and philosophically popular romp through a critique of the Critique of Mass Society. Highly recommend the book, but for the purposes of this video, I want to redirect its central thesis towards Watterson's strip, thus summarized as, don't expect anything meaningful or authentic from the marketing hucksters, okay? Doesn't matter if it's a consumer good like running shoes, or a social scene like heavy metal, or even a reactionary personal philosophy that rejects and negates all human experience. The only meaning you can rightly take away from this method is the fact that capital is trading your time and labor for illusory experiences in service to its deeper ideology. That's it. Full stop. Replay that again if you have to. Write it out and set it as your phone's wallpaper if you need to. Now, it would be a mistake to infer too much into Watterson's political views regarding this particular strip, or even his whole public body of work, so I won't, except to say he was clearly aware of this problem and felt the need to react against it. Why? We don't know. Personal politics, the consequences of his licensing fight with the syndicate, a deep and profound philosophical articulation, or even an aesthetic distaste for heavy metal. None, all, or any of the above. The cause or causes actually don't matter. So the questions I will ask instead are things like, what is the logical outcome of his critique? What does he leave unsaid on the page? And more importantly, what are we to do with this understanding? Let's consider Calvin's reaction. Upon realizing the illusion of satanic heavy metal, he seems more disheartened by the process of disillusionment than the presence of illusion itself. In this way, he almost slips into our own tendency as function adults to rationalize the illusion as real when we crash into the wall of cognitive dissonance. For example, when faced with an overwhelming lack of evidence of a God, or at least one that gives a shit about us, we rationalize what the universe is telling us with our own desires. Transmutative cannibalistic rites, or magical underpants, or suicide bombings are deemed sufficient and justified expressions of will, because that is what our emotional state allows, or in some cases, even demands. Thankfully, Calvin is such an expertly expressed desiring machine that he is likely to be on the next thing before he needs to make that rationalization. If not nihilistic music, then it's going to be something else. But what about the rest of us? We don't live in Calvin's world, and indeed we could not if we tried. Our default approach is more like Calvin's mom's. When faced with an illusion and its subsequent deconstruction, we turn reductive, we pick it apart. What is the kernel of truth within? The real, the authentic. Calvin's mom asserts, if you want to shock and provoke, be sincere about it. But is that really the answer we need? Does a young dead Norwegian metalhead really represent the desired praxis here? No, it doesn't. He probably needed some therapy, or at the bare minimum, a drinking session with a good friend who could explain how the socioeconomic forces of our society create, or at least exacerbate, mental illness. As an aside, one of the authors of the aforementioned The Rebel Cell, Andrew Potter, went on to write another popular book called The Authenticity Hoax, whereby he demonstrates how our fixation on authentic experiences really boils down to nothing more than the most recent, at least at that point in time, expression of social status and what's currently cool. In light of that, seeking out the authentic is probably not what we want to do. If there's one lesson that is hit home in my initial reading of Deleuze and Guattari's book Anti-Oedipus, it's the realization of how effective capitalism is in decoding and recoding human experience. If you think about how modern humans live in the 2020s in comparison to how humans lived 50 or even 100,000 years ago, you may as well be looking at a different or alien species. In that context, trying to cultivate an authentic human experience is a ridiculous project, even absurd. We can make overtures to our shared past, hunting our food or growing it in a backyard garden, finding a mate and starting a family, minimizing our participation in the modern economy so that we can take the time to sit back against a tree and look at clouds in the sky. But these actions are directed towards an imagined ideal. For not only do we really have no concrete idea on how early humans actually lived, we surely don't want to experience the limited lifespan and abject suffering that they did. Human authenticity? Basically, no thanks. So where to turn? Well, I don't rightly know, but I do have some suspicions. We probably embrace the spectacle of our society with dramatic irony. we accept it for what it is with the full knowledge of its absolute pure insanity, or we marvel at its remarkable ability to incorporate almost anything into it. And we probably engage in the absurd Sisyphean task of observation, consumption, and creation to generate our own critiques, performances, and expressions of our own small part in the grand illusion. Moreover, we take care not to be upset about disillusionment, because we're now at the point where we can state truthfully that we know about it from the first. We understand our place in the universe, what we can control, and the epic forces of human spirit in the physical universe that we cannot, and we don't stress about it. We understand that while our existence contains many horrors, it's also utterly amazing, and that perhaps one of the most meaningful things we can do with our lives is to continue to investigate, explore, and question as we hurtle on endlessly into the ether. And if not that, then we focus on pure survival, because if other humans aren't adept enough at threatening our material reality, then the universe surely is. It's simply a matter of waiting long enough. Oh, and finally, if it wasn't clear, we dispense with the idiotic identity constructions predicated on big C capital. So there you have it. I want to thank you for listening to what I have to say on this, and hope to see you around next time. Take care.